Hello, I'm Dr. Jodie Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. Not long after finishing my PhD, I worked with an incredible group of clinicians. So there were exercise physiologists, a psychologist, a doctor, and a physiotherapist, and we were all supporting a group of people, and it was called the Phoenix Program. We were all supporting a group of people who were struggling with obesity for a range of different reasons. And I'll never forget one of the group members, and I know her name and I can picture her gorgeous face and her beautiful laugh, and I obviously won't mention who it was, but I'll never forget some of the things that she shared with us about what it's like to live with binge eating disorder. And some of the things that she shared was just some of the simple daily activities of life, like simply putting on a pair of shoes and tying up shoelaces. Going to the toilet is so hard. And what was really hard to learn about, but also gave a real insight into the challenges that people with this type of eating disorder go through, was when she was shopping at the supermarket, she felt a lot of eyes on her with what was in her basket or in her trolley. And so she would shop at multiple places and buy what she wanted to buy, but also buying some lettuce or something that seemed more healthy so that people would not think about what she was purchasing in the way that she predicted that they were. And it was just heartbreaking to hear the challenges that she was having. And she is just one of hundreds of thousands of Australians living with an eating disorder. And as they stand at the moment, the statistics are really worrying. Around 25,000 Australians are living with anorexia nervosa. Around 100,000 Australians living with bulimia nervosa, and today's guest will help us to understand about the different eating disorders. Around 500,000 Australians living with binge eating disorder, which may surprise you that is the most common, and around 350,000 other Australians living with other forms of eating disorders. So that's totalling up somewhere near 1 million Aussies. And I know for those listeners in other parts of the world that depending on where you live, those stats amongst your population may be similar, maybe higher, maybe not quite. But it's a huge problem, and it's a problem not just for the person who's struggling, but for everyone who loves and cares for them as well. Eating disorders are serious psychological disorders, and today's guest she is just going to make such a difference for all of us to understand more. For those of you who might be struggling yourself with an eating disorder, you'll just really appreciate this guest's perspective, her empathy, her kindness, her care, and her dedication to anybody who's struggling in this way. If you care for someone or know someone who is caring for someone, please share this episode so that other people can get the support and the information that they need. It gives me great pleasure to welcome today's guest, Harriet Iles. Harriet is a psychologist who is dedicated to supporting people with eating disorders. She specialises in this area, and also other challenges that tend to go hand in hand with eating disorders, including generalised anxiety, perfectionism, which we know is a huge part of it, and low self-esteem. But in addition to working in private practice with experience in hospitals and also supporting people in corporations, in workplaces, which is another passion of hers, she's starting to do more work in schools, educating young people and really supporting school communities with understanding. So Harriet, welcome, and a huge thank you to you for joining us here on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me today, Jodie.
I'd love for you to start by telling us, what are you seeing? Like, who do eating disorders impact in our communities?
What I'm seeing in clinical practice and in education settings as well as hospitals and corporate, so it's all across the board really. Eating disorders, they do not discriminate. They can affect anyone, no matter whether you identify as female, male, non-binary, regardless of age, cultural background. They can affect anyone. And I'm actually going into a school in about a week's time, and I'll be chatting to some of the students, year fives and sixes, about body image and enhancing their relationship with food and exercise and addressing things like diet talk. So it is getting younger and younger, and we really need to increase the education around eating disorders, symptoms of eating disorders, in addition to really trying to enhance children's knowledge about social media, about how to enhance our relationship with our bodies, what nutritious and regular eating looks like as well. So it's all about education in this space, and it's going to get younger and younger in terms of, the education we need to provide to children as a result of a lot of misinformation out there, particularly on certain applications on these children's phones.
Yes.
That they're getting exposed to. So a lot of misinformation, which is as a result leading to the development of some unhelpful behaviours around body and food. Obviously, eating disorders are influenced by a multitude of different factors. It is in no way, shape or form just social media, but obviously social media is having an influence. But eating disorders are one of those things that are impacted by someone's psychology, as well as sociocultural factors. Genes can play a role. So there's loads of different things, but it is coming back to the initial question, they can affect anyone.
One of the things that's coming to mind are the way that images can be so easily manipulated online. And so I wonder, when you do talk to young people, because they're listeners today, some of them will be identifying themselves, others will know of someone, of course, and others will be parents saying, well, oh, golly, what can I do? What can I do to kind of set things up in a way that I foster healthy and nutritious attitudes towards food and towards body image? And it reminds me of a cartoon I saw years ago, and it was a little black and white drawing, and there were two little girls standing in front of a scale on the bathroom floor, and one girl said to the other, "Don't stand on it, it'll make you cry." Oh, I've never forgotten it. And whilst we don't have scales in our home, it's not something that I've ever wanted to do for myself, because I just think that you've got lots of other ways of making sure that you're healthy, your healthy weight and healthy body. But it's just one example, isn't it, of the role modelling that we can do and the things that we can say and do to support our young people. What are some of the messages parents might be able to think about when they're talking to their children with this idea of eating disorder prevention in mind?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's quite a complex one. I could talk about it for a very long time. So I think some of the key things is about, talking to your children about food as fuel for your bodies. Food is the fuel that will enable you to go out there and live a meaningful life. Food enables you to do sport, it enables you to go to school, it enables you to feel feelings and to engage with your peers. So seeing food as fuel and really promoting, regular eating. We talk about in recovery for an eating disorder, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and a couple of snacks as well. So really promoting that meal framework, and that all foods are there to be enjoyed. So we talk about food neutrality. So there's no good foods or bad foods. It's all food. And while some foods are obviously nutritious, more nutritious than other foods, we talk about all foods as being equal and can be consumed in moderation. So that sort of talk around food neutrality, your children to see that their self-worth is influenced on so many different things in their life. It's not just the way they look and what food they put in their mouth. A lot of children and teens developing eating disorders, what we're seeing is that they're basing their self-worth entirely on their weight, their shape, and their control over their self-image and their control over food. And so really trying to kind of emphasize to your children that their identity, their worth, their self-esteem is impacted by so many different things in their world. They have this inherent worth just being a human. And then they go to school and they play sport and they're with their friends and whatnot. And just the way they look and what they put in their mouth is only a really, really small part of who they are. So those sorts of messaging can be really helpful. And talking about the function of our bodies is so important. So when I'm working with someone on body image, I talk about body neutrality and body functionality. So body neutrality being seeing our bodies as they're just our bodies, like we're there to give compassion to them. Sometimes we'll have good body days and other days will be a little bit more challenging, and that is okay too. So I guess it's just coming with compassion and kindness for whatever day it is and however we're feeling, but really focusing as well on what we're grateful about our body and what it can do for us. So for some people that are able-bodied, we can run, we can walk, we can also focus on how our bodies allow us to do work and to think and love. And I say to people, it doesn't matter how you speak to your body, your heart's going to keep beating. So let's work towards a gratitude for our bodies, for the fact that it keeps us alive. And yeah, I do quite a lot of self-compassion work in this space. But parents can, I guess, it's reiterating to our kids that our bodies allow us to do all these fun things, and that our children's self-worth is dictated on so much more than what they look like.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Those key phrases around food as fuel and body neutrality, and they just can become part of the fabric of life as the way we speak about it as children are learning. And we've got teenagers now, and they're learning more about protein and carbohydrate and fats, and we're talking about the way that we need all the macronutrients and micronutrients for our body to function and for us to be able to absorb certain nutrients and things like that. So it's a really important conversation, I think, for us to have, because there's so much that we can do to shape the way our kids think about themselves. And so I appreciate those insights. And yes, I know we could focus the whole conversation on that, but one of the things that you just mentioned was about control. And I really want us to all understand more about how that relates to eating disorders and the anxiety and the psychological challenges associated with eating disorders. But just before we talk about control, could you please share with us an insight into the different types of eating disorders that people can struggle with?
Definitely. There's quite a few eating disorders now in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for conditions. So I will outline a couple of those and what they can look like for the individual. We've got restrictive eating disorders such as anorexia nervosa, which can look like a restriction of energy intake to the point that it leads to excessive weight loss, to the point where that individual's weight is not in the so-called healthy range. That individual would be engaging in behaviours that interfere with weight gain. So they could be restricting their food intake, engaging in excessive exercise. There could be self-induced vomiting as well. And we also see a lot of body image disturbances. So this really distorted perception of self. So they may say, oh, like I'm not skinny. I could even say I'm, living in a larger body, but their weight is indicating that they're very much not. So we see these disturbances in the way that people can see themselves. And often all of this is attributed to symptoms of starvation syndrome, which is this real preoccupation with the way that someone looks, a lot of physical health complications. And this is all as a result of an individual basically starving themselves and being at a low weight. So really changes in cognitive functioning, increased mood instability, irritability, and things like that as well. So that's a whole other episode in
Yes.
itself.
Yes.
But anyway, so these restrictive eating disorder presentations, we can also see bulimia nervosa. So that looks like food intake followed by episodes of binge eating. So this excessive amount of food consumed in a short window of time, where that individual feels like they have not a lot of control over what they're eating. They may be eating really rapidly. They may be eating to the point of feeling incredibly uncomfortable. And usually binge eating episodes are accompanied by a lot of anxiety, shame, guilt. And then you'd be seeing some sort of compensatory behaviour, such as self-induced vomiting, laxative use, excessive exercise, which is primarily designed to get rid of the calories consumed during the binge. But then those sorts of behaviours then kind of fuel this preoccupation with shape, weight, and control over food, that it then just leads to more dietary restriction, then binge eating, and then they're back in this cycle. So we call it the cycle of restriction, binging, purging, and then back to restriction. And a lot of what we do in treatment is help people to recognise the cycle, because a lot of people don't even realise. Give them that psychoeducation around food and weight and these thought processes as well, that we see this all or nothing thinking. It's like I'm either restricting or I'm binging, but people struggle to find that beautiful, I call it the grey zone.
Yes.
The grey zone of life. So that's bulimia nervosa, but we can see those behaviours in anyone's presentation. Even with anorexia nervosa, we've got a binge purge subtype. And then binge eating disorder, which again is binge eating. We don't see the dietary restriction. It's just the binge eating primarily. And usually that binge eating is driven by a lot of emotional dysregulation, issues in interpersonal functioning, so issues with relationships, low self-esteem, and often things like depression as well. And the binge eating is sort of primarily, the function of it is to help people with those emotions and I guess to make themselves feel better and as a coping strategy, which obviously it's not helpful, but food is there, it's accessible, and can primarily give them that instant kind of gratification, that dopamine high. So that's binge eating disorder. We also have other specified feeding and eating disorder, which is just a term for basically when someone presents with symptoms that don't necessarily meet the diagnostic criteria for those eating disorders that I've outlined. And there are others as well in the DSM-5 that we haven't spoken about. So there are more, but yeah, we call it OSFED. So that could be, say, someone just restricting their food intake, but they're not actually experiencing excessive weight loss. So we can call that atypical anorexia nervosa, where all those symptoms are pretty much there, but we just don't have the weight loss. So their BMI is indicating that they are somewhat sitting in the healthy range. So it's a very interesting field of work, and the symptoms are very, very serious. They have psychological and physical consequences. And people, in terms of their kind of presenting symptoms, those can change too. So you as a clinician need to be on top of it in terms of what to look out for and to really check in regularly in terms of what the primary focus of is in treatment and what are the primary symptoms that this individual is presenting with.
I wonder, Harriet, if can patients objectively see that this is not healthy, I'm not healthy, I'm not treating myself well, I do need help, but also at the same time don't want help because they feel as though this is an aspect of their lives that they have control over, and so can kind of see it from both points of view? Or am I really off the mark with that kind of assumption?
No, you're right on the mark. And for any clinician entering into this space, I think the one thing I'd say to them initially is roll with the resistance, embrace the ambivalence. For a lot of eating disorders like anorexia, like bulimia nervosa, where like restricting food intake is a large sort of piece of this person's puzzle. a large component of what you'll be addressing in treatment, there's a lot of ambivalence. And that sounds like, these symptoms are impairing my functioning across all my domains of daily living. I can see that, I can feel that, I can't deal with it, but I don't want to get rid of it to a certain extent. And so it's like a seesaw. I talk about it to clients as like a seesaw. And I'm there to help them. I'm there to validate them initially and go, I get it. 1 minute, it's like, yep, we want to recover. We want to get on top of this. We want to go out there and live that real meaningful life and have food freedom and food flexibility. And then the next minute, the seesaw switches. And but the eating disorder makes me feel safe. It makes me feel in control. It makes me gain this like false sense of certainty. And the behaviours, we often talk about the eating disorder being very egosyntonic, because quite often, and these are for restrictive eating disorders mainly, following dietary rules about, how much one can eat, when they can eat and whatnot, it's very reinforcing. It's very rewarding. It makes someone feel like they've got this control in life, particularly during times of uncertainty and anxiety. But I'll often say to people, but to what extent is the eating disorder now controlling you? And they'll say, I guess so, because it is interfering in my engagement across all domains of my daily living. So yes, it does make me feel in control when I can follow the rules and successfully do that. However, I feel kind of compelled to now follow the rules, and that I won't be able to cope if I don't. So to an extent, yeah, it is in control. So it's really helping them to understand that, and that kind of builds some motivation for recovery. But it's this constant kind of seesaw of, embracing the ambivalence, rolling with the resistance, and validating them where they're at.
Yes.
That's so important as a clinician in this space, is to validate where the client's at, to move them towards recovery, obviously, using our evidence-based frameworks, but to really supporting them on their journey with understanding the function that the eating disorder served in their life.
Yes.
And for a lot of people, it's a coping mechanism for anxiety, for managing uncertainty, to trying to feel that sense of control in times in their life, such as COVID, where it was all so uncertain and it felt just all encompassing and out of one's control. So yeah, we do see obviously ambivalence in treatment, and we need skills to be able to manage that, because it is a part of supporting someone on their journey towards challenging the eating disorder, moving towards health, moving towards their values and what is meaningful to them.
Yes.
What is truly meaningful to them.
What is truly meaningful to them. And I think that the idea that this zooming out, this being able to sort of step back and kind of look at what's happening, and that's a part of it, isn't it? So like you said before, that they can start to see the patterns and not to be swept away by the eating disorder and everything that comes with it, but to be able to step back and kind of see what's happening and get a little bit more perspective as a part of the treatment. But it all takes time, and you talk about it so beautifully and with such compassion. And this idea of a journey has popped up a few times when you've been speaking, and I'd love for you to share with listeners what that journey can look like from the perspective of how long does it take for somebody to recognize that they need help, to getting the help, and then what does that journey look like once you're being treated? And I know it's different, isn't it, for children versus once you turn 18. So what does that journey kind of look like from a big picture perspective?
It's definitely a journey. I think that, when you start to notice a lot of anxiety potentially around food, this need for control, potential anxiety around what you look like and wanting to make certain changes to feel more accepted, perhaps, to fit into westernized thin ideal norms and whatnot. And I'm talking a lot here about restrictive eating disorders. When you start to notice that you've got this voice in your head telling you, don't eat that, avoid that, do that exercise, burn those calories, whatnot, when you're starting to notice some of this dialogue in your head. And I think the key thing is, and it's impacting your functioning, it's impacting your relationships, it's impacting your ability to work or to go to school or to go to sport training, or when it's really impacting that process of life, of what should give you meaning in life, that's when perhaps it is beneficial to seek support from a team of medical and mental health professionals. It's really, really important because with food restriction, binging, purging behaviours, they have physical and psychological consequences. So as part of my role, I work with a multidisciplinary team. I work with doctors, psychiatrists, pediatricians, dietitians, exercise physiologists even, to support individuals. And obviously with each individual's different, so their treatment team will look a bit different too. But generally, I'd be wanting to ensure that we've got at least a GP on board supporting the individual as well as myself, because there's obviously medical monitoring that needs to take place. So, you would be wanting to seek out some medical and mental health professionals to support you on this journey. And I often talk about like the recovery process. It's one where you are going to develop such incredible lifelong skills. It's about regulating your eating, understanding the function. If you do present with an eating disorder, sometimes it's just a bit of tricky eating. Other times it is a diagnosable eating disorder. In treatment, it's all about regulating your eating patterns. It's about coming home to oneself, enhancing your relationship with food, enhancing your relationship with body, learning about body neutrality, food flexibility, challenging eating disorder cognitions and rules. Sometimes it will be weight restoration, which is quite challenging for individuals. But obviously, if they're living in bodies that are they're underweight, then that's obviously a component of what we need to do in treatment. We look at emotional regulation, distress tolerance. We look at the factors that, maintain a preoccupation with weight, shape, control. We look at perfectionism. We look at self-esteem and confidence. There's so much that we can do. And it really depends on, I guess, kind of the key maintaining factors for the eating disorder symptoms. So you'd be looking at what those factors are and working with an individual to kind of break down the things that are maintaining the eating disorder behaviours and thought patterns and whatnot. But, I talk about recovery being, as I've said before, a journey that looks different in terms of timeframes, looks different for everyone. But because eating disorders can interfere with every domain of your life, the recovery process, it can take a long time. It's very much about, I guess, coming home to yourself, coming home to your values, and understanding, I guess, the function that the eating disorder served in your life and how you can build a stronger relationship to self and develop more healthier coping strategies so that you can live a meaningful life and don't feel kind of consumed by an eating disorder.
Harriet, you talked about the multidisciplinary approach, which is just paramount to recovery. And I wonder, what's the role of hospitalisation when it comes to this journey of recovery?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because we do see a lot of individuals needing to go into hospital. I'm full disclosure, obviously I'm not a doctor. I've done a bit of work in hospitals in my capacity as a psychologist, so I can give a brief overview but can't go too in depth because that would be outside my scope. But with hospital, it is primarily medical stability. So we'll see a lot of individuals with anorexia nervosa go into hospital to become medically stable. That will enable them to seek treatment as an outpatient, say with a psychologist, clinical psychologist, dietitian. So I think the primary function of hospital is medical stability, to achieve that. Obviously, there might be weight restoration in order to achieve the medical stability in there as well, but it's primarily medical stability. We would also see patients go into hospital, say if they've got bulimia nervosa and they need a bit of a circuit breaker. So let's just say, they're stuck in that dietary restriction, binge purge cycle, and they really need that containment, then I would be recommending we go into hospital to have that containment and that circuit breaker if the individual cannot do it on their own because the eating disorder is so strong, and they can't, say their family is unable to provide sort of like 24/7 containment of, say, binge and purging behaviours. So you see hospitals serve a few different functions there, and even with bulimia nervosa, obviously you can go into hospital to ensure that there is that, to achieve medical stability as well, because we can see often with purging and binging behaviours, those have detrimental consequences on someone's health and can lead them to be medically unstable.
Yes.
To sort of sum it up, hospital is there for medical stability and for being a bit of a circuit breaker. And then in terms of achieving a full recovery, once we're medically stable, then we can go and source outpatient treatment. I also see hospitals be used to provide day programs. So this would be for day patients, not inpatients, but I used to run a day program for eating disorders. And so, people can go to hospital for the day as part of their treatment. And that can be a form of accountability that they can have alongside their individual work. In the day program, we'd be doing group therapy. And I've heard patients say that the actual group therapy was one of the best things in the recovery process for them, because they got to connect with people that had that lived experience that they really connected with and made them feel not alone. So, hospitals can actually also provide that opportunity for connection with other patients in day program settings.
One last question before I invite you to share where listeners can connect with you. When I think of eating disorders, I always think of restrictive eating disorders. And that's, I think, just perhaps I'm like most people, that when we think of eating disorders, we think of anorexia or bulimia. And I don't tend to think of binge eating, but seeing that 500,000 Australians approximately are struggling with this, and people around the world are struggling. And I think COVID, certainly that unpredictability, the lockdowns, the distress, the loss of beautiful coping strategies like being able to go to the gym or play sport or connect with friends and do all of those things. There's so much that's sort of influenced all of us and our mental health over the recent years. When it comes to binge eating, and it's such a challenge for anyone listening who identifies today that, hey, look, this is something I'm really struggling with. What would you recommend they do next? Where would you point them to start to learn more about what's happening and to be able to engage in some really productive help-seeking behaviour?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because we do know that binge eating is one of the most common eating disorder behaviours. We usually think about eating disorders as restrictive eating, but in fact, food is used to cope with emotion. And with someone that presents with binge eating, it's really important to think about the function of the binge eating. So what is it actually doing? Why am I doing it? I think is a better way to put it. Why am I doing it? How does it potentially help me? I mean, obviously it's long term. There's a lot of psychological and physical consequences, and individuals don't generally want to be doing it. But how is it helping me short term? And a lot of my clients will talk about this need for that like instant gratification. Binge eating gives them real pleasure momentarily, or it they feel really empty. There's a lot of distress in, say, their personal relationships and their friendships. And they just feel this real disconnect from people and this emptiness, and that eating can actually just give them that feeling of fullness.
Yes.
So often we see people with binge eating actually have some real challenges in their social functioning in their relationships. So part of our treatment process is actually building their interpersonal skills because of that real sense of, disconnect in their lives from people. So I think it's identifying what are the potential functions of the binge eating for me. Why am I doing it? And to question yourself in a very non-judgmental way. It's not, why are you doing this? It's just, how is this momentarily serving me? And that is going to invite you to really, I guess, address maybe some of the things that you don't have in your life that you need to develop. So, for example, if your relationships are a struggle and you're using binge eating to manage that, well, then perhaps it's about working with a psychologist on building our interpersonal functioning in our relationships. If binge eating is being used to manage big emotions, then that invites us to go, okay, let's do some work on how do we tolerate big emotions? How do we tolerate anxiety? How do we manage low mood? How do we manage our depression? Sometimes we see binge eating occur because someone is engaging in dietary restriction. And so, in fact, what we need to do there is firstly regulate their eating, regulate their blood sugar levels, so that there are, physical triggers as well as psychological. But I guess for someone with binge eating disorder, it is usually psychological. Or there could be some other medical factors going on there, but that's sort of outside my scope to talk about. But if I was working with an individual in a therapy setting, it would definitely be exploring the function of the binge eating. There are some great resources. The Butterfly Foundation have some great stuff on eating disorders, and Body Matters Australasia have some great information around eating disorders. So there's definitely some awesome websites out there that you can access some free information, different podcasts as well that address different sort of ways to manage some disordered behaviours. However, I would obviously be recommending seeking support initially through your GP, talking to them about what you're noticing, and then from there being referred to a mental health professional that really understands eating disorders, that has a special interest in eating disorders and is aware of the evidence-based therapeutic frameworks for eating disorders, and really starting that journey to, I guess, being able to better manage those big feelings, whatever I guess the binge eating was helping you with. Often I say eating disorders, yes, they obviously are about eating, but they also are like nothing about eating.
Yes,
It's
it's all
really got
about it,
nothing
and
to
it's
do with
not.
eating.
Yes,
Yeah, it's like all about it, but it's when you actually get to the core of what's going on for that individual, it's got nothing to do with eating. And that's why I love working in this space, because of the complexity. And it's like problem solving, and it's a bit of a mystery at the start when you get to meet your clients, because sometimes they don't even know. So you're helping them to really go layer to layer to layer to understand what is at the heart of all of this.
it's not easy doing that work, and having someone like yourself and your passion for this, your expertise, of course, and your compassion shines through. And we are so grateful to you for sharing that with us here today. I always learn a lot every time I have a new guest, but I think it's just very, very special to be able to have someone like you to share what you are seeing and observing and how you're working, and what kind of lies beneath what appears to be the problem on the outside, because like you say, it's all about the food, but it's not about the food. And I think a conversation like this really helps listeners get much more insight. And so wherever this lands in your world, whether or not it's something that you're experiencing yourself, or you know someone who is, or you're a teacher in a school, or you are a parent of young children or children who are teenagers like me, or somebody who is struggling with their eating, then I really think that there's been something for everybody to take away. And I thank you for that. So, Harriet, how can people work with you and connect with you? And what sort of appointments do you have available for anybody who might be looking for a practitioner like yourself?
Yes, so I work with individuals as well as families. So with adolescents who present with a restrictive eating disorder, often we'll be using a family-based model for treatment, but I also do work with some teens individually, as well as individual adults doing face-to-face appointments and telehealth appointments. I'm based in Sydney, and I work at a clinic specifically for eating disorders in North Sydney. In terms of wanting to connect with me, that would be on LinkedIn. And then if you are looking for psychological therapy, then it would be to see me in the clinic for face-to-face or online appointments.
Okay, thank you. And I'll put details for connecting with Harriet in the show notes. So, Harriet, thank you again for sharing your time and your expertise with us today, and for really helping us to learn more about this very complex area of mental health.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And thank you, listeners. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the podcast. And I, of course, very much look forward to being back with you again next week. Okay, bye. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr. Jodie Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.